While Occam's razor tells us that the most obvious answer is normally the correct one, the key word there is normally. Today's case will start like many that we've seen before, and many of us would make the same assumption, bearing into mind what we know. But it brings into sharp focus the importance of following the facts and the evidence, and shows how dangerous assumptions can be. We're heading to Wisconsin in 2016 to look at the tragic case of Nicole Vanderheyden. This is Murderous Crows. In Brown County, Wisconsin, there was a town called LaPere that existed from 1839 until 1994. For some reason, it took over 150 years to realize that the town of LaPere may be confused with the nearby city of LaPere, and that maybe they should change the name. So in 1994, the town of Ledgeview came into being. It is a very pretty place, and for some reason unknown to me, the population of the small community practically doubled from just over 3,000 in 2000 to about 6,500 in 2010. Maybe they have really good burgers, or perhaps a giant tree house. Who knows? But it is a pretty but small town, like so many others in the United States. But it is an unpleasant reason that brings us to this picturesque and quaint destination for today's tale. It was in the town of Ledgeview in 2016 that we would have found a blended family happily going about their business. 35-year-old Douglass Detrie lived with his partner, 31-year-old Nicole Vanderheyden. They had a 6-month-old son called Dylan together, while Nicole had 2 children named Michaela and Tyler from a previous relationship. On the 20th of May 2016, like many parents of a young baby, they were keen for a break and to let off some steam. So they arranged a babysitter and headed out for a night of drinking with friends, seeing a band, and forgetting about being parents for just a little while. So far, so ordinary. They headed to nearby Green Bay, where they met with friends, and they had tickets to see a band in a bar called the Watering Hole and they attended this bar for the concert, and they enjoyed themselves. Though there were some rumblings of some discontent between Douglas and Nicole. After the show and some more drinking, Nicole and some of the friends headed to another bar that was located on South Broadway called the Sardine Can. Doesn't sound appealing to me, but you do you. But Douglas didn't go with them, instead preferring to stay at the watering hole for a while longer with his friend Greg Matu. Now this prompted an exchange of text messages between Doug and Nicole, including accusations of controlling behavior and of cheating. Oh, trouble in paradise. Despite the two being in separate locations, later surveillance footage would reveal that Nicole still had a good time at the bar with her friends, with her not wanting the rare night out to go to waste. But then things took a turn, as they tend to do. When Nicole tried to call Doug to talk things through, he refused to answer the call. But when her friend tried to call him, she chose to answer. Now Nicole took this as an affront and got very upset. So upset, in fact, that she left the bar. A friend went after her and tried to get her to come back inside the bar, but she refused. Instead, the friend watched Nicole walk up the street with her phone to her ear. She turned at the end of the street, and that was the last time Nicole Vanderheyden was seen by any of the friends. Soon after Nicole left, Doug and Greg turned up at the Sardine Can, and Doug wanted to let Nicole calm down before talking to her. Now we get to the next day, and this was after Greg had dropped Doug at home. The next day, Doug woke up and was seriously hungover. He sorted baby boy Dylan out in terms of changing and feeding, and noticed that Nicole wasn't home. He assumed that she must have crashed with a friend, and with Dylan sorted, he went back to sleep. Upon waking up later in the day, he noticed that Nicole still wasn't home and hadn't tried to get in touch. So after ringing around her friends, he became concerned enough to go to the Ledgeview police station and report her missing at around 4:30 p.m. But disturbingly, even before Doug had reported Nicole missing, a farmer named Richard Vanderheyden had found a body in a field that was on Hoffman Road in Bellevue. And this field would have been about 3 miles from the home that Nicole and Doug shared. While it seemed a strange coincidence that somebody was reported missing and a body had turned up, the body found could not be immediately confirmed as Nicole. The poor victim had been severely beaten and strangled and left naked apart from a pink wristband and a single sock. It would take dental records to ultimately confirm that the body was in fact that of Nicole Vanderheyden. There were so many abrasions all over her body and so much blood around her head and upper body that it was only on post-mortem that cause of death could be confirmed as blunt force trauma to the head along with ligature strangulation. As a result of their seeming disagreement on the night before, as well as, obviously, Doug being Nicole's significant other, the police spoke to Doug straight away, if only to rule him out as a suspect.
Talk to are the people that are, closest to whoever's missing or deceased, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's totally normal for us to be talking to you.
I assume so, yeah.
And Greg and Aaron and everybody else that was there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, your whole group of friends are the last people that she was with for the most part.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do not suspect.
And she did not come home at all last night after you got
Not at all. There wasn't a blip or word from her.
Okay. She never stepped foot into that house after you
Nope.
after you got
Not that it would have been. No, she didn't. She would have came and went to bed. And I woke up to Dylan crying, so.
And you don't know where she is or what happened to her?
Not a clue.
Did you do anything to cause her to go missing?
No, not at all. Besides being a bit on the phone,
Yeah. Well, I think what we're looking at is this body that was found down the street. I don't think it's been 100% identified as her, but there's a lot of similarities.
What happened?
Well, I don't know.
That's what we're trying to figure out here.
That's what we don't know.
Is there anything else that you can think of that would be helpful to us in this?
I'm gonna talk to everybody on that frickin' street in that neighborhood. I need to do it.
Well, that's part of what we're gonna do too. Obviously we can't go do it at 2:30 in the morning.
I'm gonna talk to everybody on that frickin' street in that neighborhood. I need to do it.
Well, that's part of what we're gonna do too. Obviously we can't go do it at 2:30 in the morning. Is there anything in your house that they're gonna find that's gonna say you had anything to do with this?
Absolutely nothing whatsoever.
Okay.
Nothing. I have nothing to do with this. It's just...
But as they dug, pun very much intended, into his life, they discovered some unsettling information. After searching the home, car and phone records, they saw a pattern of some level of ongoing disagreements. More ominously, they found a pair of Air Jordans with what appeared to be mud and blood on them. The soles also appeared to be similar in pattern to marks that were left on Nicole's body where she had been stamped on during a vicious and painful ordeal. Reddish-brown staining, often indicative of blood, was found in the garage and in Nicole's car. So all signs were pointing to a domestic argument having got out of hand. And Doug was kept in jail pending the results of DNA and other forensic analyses. At this stage, authorities fully expected the further tests to reinforce their case against Douglass Detrie. But when the DNA results from Nicole's sock came back, they revealed a male profile, but critically, this did not match Douglas's DNA profile. The material found in Nicole's car was found not to be blood, while the stains in the garage and on the shoes, while confirmed to be blood, was shown not to be human. And then further backing up the exculpatory evidence was data analysis of Doug Detrie's Fitbit, which showed that he had taken no more than 12 steps between 3:10 and 6:10 a.m. on the 21st of May, further showing that he would not have been involved in Nicole's murder. But if it wasn't Doug Detrie, then who had cruelly beaten and strangled the 31-year-old mother of 3? With Doug now released from jail, it looked more and more likely that the case would go cold, as there were no more leads to follow. But forensics would come up trumps yet again. When DNA was found from the sock to exclude Doug as a suspect, there was not enough at that time to develop a full profile. But dogged attempts by the forensic examiners finally produced a significant enough profile to run through the national DNA database. And thankfully, for police desperate to find more leads to follow, there was a match. A man named George Stephen Birch, originally from Virginia but who had recently moved to Wisconsin, was a positive match to the DNA from the sock. But moving to the same state as a murder victim is extremely tenuous, and police needed much more to link Birch to Nicole to make a strong case for a homicide conviction. It would be a stroke of luck on the police's part that would provide all of the evidence that they needed. And it would be the digital forensic examiners that would get a gold star for their data mining. The Green Bay Police Department were looking into George Birch's possible involvement in an unrelated incident involving a vehicle that was connected to him. Now, this vehicle had been the subject of a stolen vehicle report and ultimately also a hit and run. So George was questioned by the police in relation to that case on the 8th of June 2016, where he denied any involvement. He told police that he was at a bar that particular night that the hit and run happened, and that he was texting a woman throughout the night. Now, due to that, police asked him for his consent to see the text messages, and he agreed to this. The officer told him that he would download information off the phone because it's a lot easier to do that than try and take a bunch of pictures that then need to be scanned in, and I agree with him. Take the lazy option every time if you can. Now, George Birch signed a consent form allowing him to do this, and as such, that the information and data that was downloaded was retained on his file. When the other officers who were investigating Nicole's homicide discovered the data from his mobile phone on his file, they took a look at it. And they noticed that he had an email linked to a Google account. And they were aware that Google dashboard data could provide GPS data, and they wanted to find out where George Birch was the night Nicole Vanderheyden was murdered. Now, Google Dashboard combines mobile phone tower data, local Wi-Fi hotspots, and GPS locators. And when all this stuff was combined together, it could pinpoint the location of a phone. The police asked Google for that information, and Google duly provided that information to the police. They discovered that on the night of the 20th of May, George Birch was at a bar called Richard Cranium's. I don't know if that's dickhead in disguise. He was at this bar, which was just half a mile from the sardine can. He left that bar at 2:30 a.m. and the data then places him at Nicole's house. He remained there for around an hour, from 3:01 a.m. until 3:52 a.m. The data showed he then went to the farm field, which one, you know the one, just after 4 a.m. where Nicole's body was later found, and also the highway off-ramp where Nicole's clothing and belongings had been found, before he returned home at 4:22 a.m. It was extremely compelling evidence, and Birch was duly charged with first-degree intentional homicide, and he remained in jail until the trial. And it was at the trial that both Doug Detrie and George Birch would present their differing versions of the events of the night of the 20th of May 2016. In court, Doug Detrie said his relationship with Nicole was far from perfect, but was never violent. The court heard that when Doug and Greg left the watering hole, he spoke to Nicole on the phone, but Doug said that she wasn't making any sense. He asked Greg to speak to her, and Greg asked her to tell them where she was so that they could pick her up. But before she could do so, her phone went dead. Doug called her a number of times after that, but the calls went straight to voicemail. The court heard that Doug and Greg drove around the area near to the sardine can, but didn't see any sign of Nicole. When they went into the sardine can, Nicole wasn't there and her friends had also left. Figuring there was not much else to do, Greg and Doug stayed and had a few more drinks for around an hour before they left at 2:15 a.m. Greg dropped Doug at home, and it was after 2:30 a.m. when they got back. Doug asked the babysitter if she could call Nicole, and she duly tried this, but her calls went straight to voicemail too. Greg and the babysitter duly left, and Douglas went to bed. The court further heard that Douglas woke after 6 a.m. as his son needed to be fed, and at that time Nicole still wasn't home and hadn't been in touch. He figured she was just sleeping it off. He went back to bed and got up at around 10:30 a.m. But his calls to Nicole continued to go straight to voicemail, so he reached out to her friends, but none of them knew where she was. He reported her missing later that afternoon, as we discussed earlier. The court heard from the officer who first spoke to Doug, and he told the jury that Doug did not have any scratches or marks on his arms or hands or any other visible injuries, and was very cooperative at the time. He gave consent for his home to be searched, and the court heard that when the police told him that they believed the body that was found was Nicole, that he pretty much lost it. He was crying, sobbing, and seemed to be hyperventilating. The prosecution postulated that George Birch drove Nicole to her home, and he did so because he expected her to have sex with him. But when she rejected his advances, he raped her, beat her, and strangled her to death with a charging cable. It was their case that Nicole tried to get away and make it to the safety of her home. But as she ran towards her house, George Birch caught up with her and beat her savagely on the driveway. The prosecution told the jury that Nicole's injuries indicated that she was slammed on the ground repeatedly and stamped on and kicked multiple times. The defense, however, and perhaps unsurprisingly, told a different story. And wowee, it's a doozy. According to Birch, he met her at the bar Richard Cranium's, which I still think is a disguised version of Dickhead. And after a flirtatious night, and at closing time of around 2:30 a.m, he offered to drive her home. She agreed, and he drove the 8 miles to her house. When they pulled up across from her house, they continued talking and then began kissing, which led them to become more intimate. According to Birch, they had sex in the back seat of his car. Nicole was lying on the back seat, and he was standing with the rear passenger door open. At this point, Birch claimed that he was knocked out by someone and woke up on the ground to find Doug standing over him with a gun. According to Birch, Nicole was already dead at that point, and I don't know how he knew that. Was he a qualified medical person? I don't believe so. But he believed Doug must have killed her, and then he claimed that Doug threatened him at gunpoint and ordered him to put Nicole's body into his car and drive to the field before dumping her body in a ditch. And George did as he was told. As you do. And when they were at the field, he lunged at Doug and knocked him over and managed to get away from him and drive off. He saw Nicole's clothes and belongings in the car, so he threw them out of the car window on his way home. After closing arguments, the jury retired to consider their verdict. But just 45 minutes later, they had a question which deeply troubled the prosecution. They wanted to see the cord used to strangle Nicole, as well as cords found in Doug's garage, so that they could see if they were possibly a match. Now, of course, this led the prosecution to believe that the jury were perhaps believing Birch's story, and that the real killer was in fact Doug Detrie. But thankfully, that wasn't the case. The jury found Birch guilty of first-degree intentional homicide after 3 hours of deliberations.
State of Wisconsin versus George Stephen Birch, Brown County Case 16 CF 1309. The verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant, George Stephen Birch, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in the information. It is signed by our foreperson and dated this first day of March 2018. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is this your verdict? Saying yes and shaking their heads. Does either party wish to have the jury polled?
Yes, Judge.
All right.
The harshest sentence that could be given in Wisconsin at this time was life in prison without the possibility of parole. And that is exactly what Birch received. When sentencing, Judge Zakowski said the death of Nicole Vanderheyden is the most brutal murder that has ever been committed by one person in the history of Brown County. Now, Birch appealed the conviction on the basis that his Fourth Amendment rights were violated when the judge at his trial allowed data from his mobile phone to be used during the trial. He argued that the initial download of the data exceeded the scope of the consent that he gave, that the data was unlawfully retained, and that the subsequent accessing of the data violated his reasonable expectation of privacy. He claimed that he only allowed his text messages to be accessed in relation to the vehicular case with the hit and run, and never intended for it to be used in relation to Nicole's case. For obvious reasons, I think you'll agree. The Supreme Court rejected his appeal and upheld the conviction. Justice Brian Hagedorn said his rights were not violated, with him quoted as saying, "Birch argues that the initial download of the data exceeded the scope of his consent, that the data was unlawfully retained, and the subsequent accessing of the data further violated his reasonable expectation of privacy." We conclude that even if some constitutional defect attended either the initial download or subsequent accessing of the mobile phone data, there was no law enforcement misconduct that would warrant the exclusion of that data. Therefore, we conclude the Circuit Court correctly denied Birch's motion to suppress that data. The Supreme Court rejected his appeal on June the 29th, 2021. He is currently incarcerated at the Wisconsin Secure Program Facility, which safely and humanely houses, manages and controls inmates who have been classified maximum custody, and further provides inmates the opportunity to acquire skills needed for potential integration into less secure correctional environments. Whatever, you do you. And that was the case of Nicole Vanderheyden, a woman who was in the wrong place at the wrong time and crossed paths with yet another man who would not take no for an answer. Then, rather than face up to what he did, he tried to frame the grieving partner as the true culprit in the savage murder. George Birch was, and presumably still is, a cockwomble. Doug Detrie was not perfect, and his relationship with Nicole may have been rocky. But my heart still goes out to the man who was wrongfully accused of murdering the mother of his baby boy. Nicole's only misstep was being in the wrong place after an argument with her boyfriend. She may have been flirty on the night in question, but that is most definitely not a crime. Her death was cruel, vicious, and totally unnecessary. And this video is unquestionably dedicated to her. And I hope her children are coping with the devastating loss, and that they are navigating the grieving process as well as they can. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. This is my sentient paperweight Samson. And we will see you when we see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it, you say